Charmides by Plato. Characters: Socrates, narrator, Charmides, Chaerephon, Critias. Setting: the Palestra of Turias near the porch of the king Archon. Yesterday evening I returned from the army at Potidaea after being away for a long time. I decided to revisit my old haunts, so I went to the Palestra of Turias, which is located across from the temple next to the porch of the king Archon. There, I encountered a group of people, most of whom I knew, but not all. My visit was unexpected, and as soon as they saw me entering, they greeted me from a distance on all sides. Chaerephon, who is a bit eccentric, jumped up and ran to me, grabbing my hand and asking, "How did you survive, Socrates?" I should explain that there had been a battle at Potidaea not long before we left, and the news had just reached Athens. "As you can see," I replied, "I made it back." "There was a rumor," he said, "that the battle was very intense and that many of our friends had fallen." "That's not far from the truth," I replied. "I suppose you were there," he said. "I was." "Then sit down and tell us the whole story, which we have only heard bits and pieces of so far." I took the seat he assigned me next to Critias, the son of Calliescus. After greeting him and the rest of the company, I told them the news from the army and answered their questions. Then, when that was enough, I began asking about things at home, the current state of philosophy, and the youth. I asked if any of them were particularly wise or beautiful, or both. Critias, gesturing towards the door, drew my attention to some young men who were entering, talking loudly to each other and followed by a crowd. "You'll soon be able to judge the beauties, Socrates," he said. "Those who were just coming in are the vanguard of the great beauty of the day, as he is thought to be, and he's likely not far behind." "Who is he?" I asked. "And who is his father?" "His name is Charmides," he replied. "He's my cousin and the son of my uncle Glaucon. I think you know him too, although he was still a child when you left." "Certainly, I know him," I said, because even then, when he was just a child, he was remarkable. "I imagine that by now he must be almost a young man." "You'll see in a moment how much progress he's made and what he's like," he said. He had barely finished speaking when Charmides entered. "Now, my friend, you know that I can't judge anything, and when it comes to beauty, I'm like a white line measuring chalk. Almost all young people appear beautiful to me. But at that moment, when I saw him coming in, I must admit that I was completely astonished by his beauty and stature. Everyone seemed to be infatuated with him. There was amazement and confusion when he entered, and a group of admirers followed him. It wasn't surprising that grown men like us were affected in this way, but I noticed that the boys felt the same. Every single one of them, even the youngest child, turned and looked at him as if he were a statue. Chaerephon called me over and said, "What do you think of him, Socrates? Isn't he handsome?" "Absolutely," I said. "But you wouldn't think much of his face if you could see his naked body. It's absolutely perfect." They all agreed with this. "By Heracles," I said, "there has never been such a paragon, if he only has one other small addition." "What's that?" asked Critias. "If he has a noble soul, and being from your family, Critias, he's expected to have one." "He's as good on the inside as he is on the outside," replied Critias. "So, before we see his body, shouldn't we ask him to show us his soul, naked and unmasked? He's at an age where he'll enjoy talking." "He will," said Critias, "and I can tell you that he's already a philosopher and quite a poet, not just in his own opinion, but in the opinion of others." "That, my dear Critias," I replied, "is a distinction that has long been in your family and has been passed down to you from Solon. But why don't you call him and show him to us? Even if he were younger than he is, it wouldn't be inappropriate for him to talk to us in your presence, since you're his guardian and cousin." "Very well," he said. "I'll call him." Turning to the attendant, he said, "Call Charmides and tell him that I want him to come and see a doctor about the headache he mentioned to me the day before yesterday." Then, addressing me again, he added, "Lately he's been complaining of having a headache when he wakes up in the morning. Why don't you make him believe that you know a cure for headaches?" "Why not?" I said. "But will he come?" "He'll definitely come," he replied. He came as he was told and sat down between Critias and me. There was a lot of commotion as everyone pushed their neighbors with all their might to make room for him next to themselves, until at the two ends of the row one person had to get up and the other was pushed sideways. Now, my friend, I was starting to feel awkward. My previous confidence in my ability to converse with him had disappeared. And when Critias told him that I was the one with the cure, he looked at me in an indescribable way and was about to ask a question. At that moment, everyone in the palestra crowded around us, and oh, what luck! I caught a glimpse of the inside of his garment and was instantly smitten. Then I could no longer control myself. I thought about how well Socrates understood the nature of love when he warned someone not to expose a vulnerable youth to someone who would harm them, as a fawn would be devoured by a lion. I felt that I had been overcome by a wild and uncontrollable desire, but I managed to keep myself in check. When he asked me if I knew the cure for a headache, I answered, though it was difficult, that I did. He then asked me what it was. I replied that it was a certain type of leaf that needed to be accompanied by a charm. If a person repeated the charm while using the cure, they would be healed. However, the leaf would be ineffective without the charm. He then said that he would write down the charm as I dictated it. I asked if he would do so with my consent or without it. He responded, laughing, that he would do so with my consent. I agreed and asked if he was certain that he knew my name. He replied that he should know me because there was a lot of talk about me among his friends. He also remembered seeing me with his cousin Critias when he was a child. I was glad that he remembered me because it made me feel more comfortable with him and better able to explain the nature of the charm, which had been difficult for me before. I told Charmides that the charm would do more than just cure a headache. I asked if he had ever heard skilled physicians say to a patient with bad eyes that they couldn't cure the eyes without treating the head. They also said that attempting to cure just the head without considering the rest of the body was foolish. They applied their methods to the entire body, treating and healing both the whole and the part together. I asked if he had noticed this. He said he had. I told him that the physicians were right and asked if he agreed with them. He responded that he certainly did. His agreement reassured me and I slowly regained confidence and warmth. I explained to Charmides that the charm I learned while serving in the army came from a physician of the Thracian king Zamolxis, who was said to be so skilled that he could grant immortality. This Thracian told me that the Greek physicians were correct in their beliefs about treating the whole body, but Zamolxis, who was both our king and a god, went further. He said that just as you shouldn't try to cure the eyes without treating the head or the head without treating the body, you shouldn't try to cure the body without treating the soul. This, he said, was why many diseases were unknown to the Greek physicians because they ignored the importance of studying the whole. According to him, all good and evil, whether in the body or in human nature, originated in the soul and spread from there, like a head overflowing into the eyes. Therefore, to heal the head and body, you must start by healing the soul. The cure, my dear Charmides, is achieved through the use of certain charms, which are kind and soothing words. Through these charms, temperance is instilled in the soul, and where there is temperance, health is quickly restored, not only to the head but to the entire body. The person who taught me the cure and the charm also gave me a special instruction: do not let anyone persuade you to cure the head without first giving you their soul to be cured by the charm. This, he said, is the great mistake of our time in the treatment of the human body, as physicians separate the soul from the body. He emphasized this point and made me swear to his words: do not, under any circumstances, allow anyone, no matter how rich, noble, or beautiful, to receive the cure without the charm. I have sworn to this and I must keep my oath. Therefore, if you allow me to apply the Thracian charm to your soul as the stranger instructed, I will then proceed to apply the cure to your head. But if you do not allow it, I do not know what I will do with you, my dear Charmides. Critias, upon hearing this, said, if the pain in his head compels him to improve his mind, the headache will be an unexpected gain for my young relative. He then said to me, Socrates, I can tell you that Charmides is not only exceptionally beautiful but also possesses that quality which you refer to as temperance. I confirmed that temperance was indeed what I meant. Critias continued, saying that Charmides was the most temperate person he knew and excelled in all aspects. I agreed and added that Charmides should excel in all good qualities, as there were no two Athenian families whose union would produce a better or nobler descendant than the two from which he came. His father's family, descended from Critias, was renowned for their beauty, virtue, and all other forms of fortune. They were praised in the panegyrical verses of Anacreon, Solon, and many other poets. His mother's family was equally distinguished, as his maternal uncle Pyrilampes was said to be unmatched in Persia and throughout Asia for his stature and beauty. The entire family was of the highest caliber. Having such ancestors, you should be the best in everything, and, dear son of Glaucon, your appearance does not dishonor any of them. If you combine beauty with self-control, and if you possess the qualities that Critias claims you do, then, dear Charmides, you are truly blessed as the son of your mother. And here lies the point: if, as Critias claims, you already possess the gift of self-control and are sufficiently temperate, then you have no need for any charms, whether from Zamolxis or Aberrus the Hyperborean, and I might as well give you the remedy for your headache right away. But if you have not yet acquired this quality, I must use the charm before administering the medicine. Please inform me, therefore, whether you agree with what Critias has been saying. Do you or do you not possess this quality of self-control? Charmides blushed, and his blush enhanced his beauty, for modesty is becoming in youth. He then honestly admitted that he could not immediately answer yes or no to the question I had asked. He explained that if he were to affirm that he is not temperate, it would be strange for him to say such a thing about himself, and it would contradict Critias and many others who believe, as he tells you, that he is temperate. On the other hand, if he were to say that he is temperate, he would have to praise himself, which would be impolite. Therefore, he did not know how to answer. I told him that his response was natural and suggested that we should together inquire whether he possesses this quality I am asking about or not. This way he would not be compelled to say something he does not like, and I would not be a reckless practitioner of medicine. If he agreed, I would share the inquiry with him, but I would not press him if he preferred not to continue. There is nothing I would like better, he said, and as far as I am concerned, you may proceed in the way you think best. I think, I said, that it would be best for me to begin by asking you a question. If self-control abides in you, you must have an opinion about it. It must give some indication of its nature and qualities which may help you form a notion of it. Is that true? Yes, he said, I think that is true. You know your native language, I said, so you must be able to express what you feel about this. Certainly, he said. In order for me to form a guess as to whether you possess self-control or not, tell me, what do you think self-control is? At first, he hesitated and was reluctant to answer. Then he said that he believed self-control is doing things in an orderly and calm manner, such as walking in the streets, talking, or anything else of that nature. In short, he said, in his opinion, self-control is tranquility. Are you correct, Charmides? I asked. Some might argue that the calm are the temperate, I said, but let us see if these words have any meaning. First, tell me, would you not agree that self-control belongs to the class of the noble and good? Yes. But when you are with a writing master, is it better to write the same letters quickly or calmly? Quickly. And when reading, is it better to read quickly or slowly? Quickly. And in playing the lyre or wrestling, is it not better to be quick and sharp rather than calm and slow? Yes. The same applies to boxing and the pancratium? Certainly. And in leaping, running, and other physical exercises, is it not good to be quick and agile, and bad to be slow, inactive, and calm? That is evident. So, in all bodily actions, it is not calmness but the greatest agility and quickness that is noblest and best? Yes, certainly. And is self-control a good thing? Yes. Then, in relation to the body, it is not calmness but quickness that represents the higher degree of self-control if self-control is a good thing? True, he said. And which is better, easiness in learning or difficulty in learning? Easiness. Yes, I said, and easiness in learning means learning quickly, while difficulty in learning means learning calmly and slowly. True. And is it not better to teach someone quickly and energetically rather than calmly and slowly? Yes. And which is better, to recall and remember things quickly and readily or calmly and slowly? The former. And is shrewdness not a quickness or cleverness of the mind rather than calmness? True. And is it not best to understand what is said, whether at the writing masters, the music masters, or anywhere else, not as calmly as possible, but as quickly as possible? Yes. And in the mental searches or deliberations of the mind, it is not the calmest, as I imagine, that is considered praiseworthy, but rather the one who deliberates and discovers most easily and quickly? Quite true, he said. And in everything concerning both body and mind, swiftness and activity are clearly better than slowness and calmness? Clearly they are. Therefore, self-control is not calmness, and the temperate life is not calm, certainly not according to this view. For the temperate life is believed to be the good. And one of two things is true, either rarely or never do calm actions in life appear better than quick and energetic ones, or even if we assume that there are as many calm noble actions as there are quick and vehement ones, still, even in that case, self-control would not be acting calmly any more than acting quickly and energetically, whether in walking, talking, or anything else. And the calm life would not be more temperate than the unquiet life, since we admit that self-control is a good and noble thing, and the quick have been shown to be as good as the calm. I think, Socrates, he said, that you are right. Then once more, Charmides, I said, fix your attention and look within, consider the effect which temperance has upon yourself and the nature of that which has the effect. Think over all this and, like a brave youth, tell me what is temperance? After a moment's pause, in which he made a real effort to think, he said, my opinion is, Socrates, that temperance makes a man ashamed or modest, and that temperance is the same as modesty. Very good, I said, and did you not admit, just now, that temperance is noble? Yes, certainly, he said. And the temperate are also good? Yes. And can that be good which does not make men good? Certainly not. And you would infer that temperance is not only noble, but also good? That is my opinion. Well, I said, but surely you would agree with Homer when he says modesty is not good for a needy man? Yes, he said, I agree. Then I suppose that modesty is and is not good? Clearly. But temperance, whose presence makes men only good and not bad, is always good? That appears to me to be as you say. And the inference is that temperance cannot be modesty if temperance is a good, and if modesty is as much an evil as a good? All that, Socrates, appears to me to be true, but I should like to know what you think about another definition of temperance, which I just now remember to have heard from someone who said that temperance is doing our own business. Was he right who affirmed that? You monster. I said, this is what Critias or some philosopher has told you. Someone else then said Critias, for certainly I have not. But what matter, said Charmides, from whom I heard this? No matter at all, I replied, for the point is not who said the words but whether they are true or not. There you are in the right, Socrates, he replied. To be sure, I said, yet I doubt whether we shall ever be able to discover their truth or falsehood, for they are a kind of riddle. What makes you think so, he said. Because, I said, he who uttered them seems to me to have meant one thing and said another. Is the scribe, for example, to be regarded as doing nothing when he reads or writes? I should rather think that he was doing something. And does the scribe write or read, or teach you boys to write or read, your own names only, or did you write your enemies' names as well as your own and your friends? As much one as the other. And was there anything meddling or intemperate in this? Certainly not. And yet if reading and writing are the same as doing, you were doing what was not your own business? But they are the same as doing. And the healing art, my friend, and building and weaving and doing anything whatever which is done by art, these all clearly come under the head of doing? Certainly. And do you think that a state would be well ordered by a law which compelled every man to weave and wash his own coat and make his own shoes and his own flask and strigil and other implements on this principle of every one doing and performing his own, and abstaining from what is not his own? I think not, he said. But I said, a temperate state will be a well-ordered state. Of course, he replied. Then temperance, I said, will not be doing one's own business, not at least in this way, or doing things of the sort? Clearly not. Then, as I was just now saying, he who declared that temperance is a man doing his own business had another and a hidden meaning, for I do not think that he could have been such a fool as to mean this. Was he a fool who told you, Charmides? Nay, he replied, I certainly thought him a very wise man. Then I am quite certain that he put forth his definition as a riddle, thinking that no one would know the meaning of the words doing his own business. I dare say, he replied. And what is the meaning of a man doing his own business? Can you tell me? Indeed, I cannot, and I should not wonder if the man himself who used this phrase did not understand what he was saying. Whereupon he laughed slyly and looked at Critias. Critias had long been showing uneasiness, for he felt that he had a reputation to maintain with Charmides and the rest of the company. He had, however, hitherto managed to restrain himself, but now he could no longer forbear, and I am convinced of the truth of the suspicion which I entertained at the time that Charmides had heard this answer about temperance from Critias. And Charmides, who did not want to answer himself, but to make Critias answer, tried to stir him up. He went on pointing out that he had been refuted, at which Critias grew angry and appeared, as I thought, inclined to quarrel with him, just as a poet might quarrel with an actor who spoiled his poems in repeating them, so he looked hard at him and said, Do you imagine, Charmides, that the author of this definition of temperance did not understand the meaning of his own words because you do not understand them? Why, at his age, I said, most excellent Critias, he can hardly be expected to understand, but you who are older and have studied may well be assumed to know the meaning of them, and therefore, if you agree with him and accept his definition of temperance, I would much rather argue with you than with him about the truth or falsehood of the definition. I entirely agree, said Critias, and accept the definition. Very well, I said. Now let me repeat my question. Do you agree, as I was just saying, that all craftsmen make or do something? I do. And do they make or do their own business only, or do they also make or do the business of others? They make or do the business of others as well. And are they temperate, since they make not only for themselves but also for others? Why not? He said. I have no objection, I said, but there may be a difficulty for someone who defines temperance as doing one's own business and then says that there is no reason why those who do the business of others should not be temperate. No, he said, did I ever admit that those who do the business of others are temperate? I said those who make, not those who do. What? I asked, do you mean to say that doing and making are not the same? No more than working and making are the same, he replied. I have learned this from Hesiod, who says that work is no disgrace. Now, do you think that if he meant by working and doing the things you were describing, he would have said that there was no disgrace in them, for example, in making shoes or selling pickles or working in a house of ill repute? That, Socrates, is not to be supposed. I believe he distinguished making from doing and work. While he admitted that making something might sometimes be a disgrace when the occupation was not honorable, he thought that work was never a disgrace at all. He called things nobly and usefully made works, and such makings he called workings and doings. He must be understood to have called only man's proper business work, and what is harmful not his business. In that sense, Hesiod and any other wise man may reasonably be supposed to call him wise who does his own work. "O Critias," I said, "as soon as you began speaking, I knew that you would consider what is proper to a man and what is his own as good. I am familiar with the endless distinctions that Prodicus draws about names. I have no objection to you giving names any meaning you please as long as you tell me what you mean by them. So please start again and be a little clearer. Do you mean that this doing or making or whatever word you would use of good actions is temperance?" "I do," he said. "Then not he who does evil but he who does good is temperate?" "Yes," he said, "and you would agree, friend. It doesn't matter whether I would or not. Right now, the point at issue is what you are saying, not what I think." "Well," he answered, "I mean to say that he who does evil and not good is not temperate, and he who does good and not evil is temperate. I define temperance as the doing of good actions. You may very well be right in what you are saying, but I am curious to know whether you believe that temperate men are ignorant of their own temperance." "I don't think so," he said. "And yet, weren't you saying just now that craftsmen might be temperate in doing another's work as well as in doing their own?" "I was," he replied. "But what is your point?" "I don't have a particular point, but I want you to tell me whether a physician who cures a patient may do good to himself and good to another as well?" "I think he may." "And he who does so is doing his duty?" "Yes." "And doesn't he who does his duty act temperately or wisely?" "Yes, he acts wisely." "But must the physician necessarily know when his treatment is likely to be beneficial and when not? Or must the craftsman necessarily know when he is likely to benefit or not benefit from the work he is doing?" "I suppose not." "Then," I said, "he may sometimes do good or harm and not know what he is doing, and yet, in doing good, as you say, he has acted temperately or wisely. Wasn't that your statement?" "Yes." "So, it seems that in doing good he may act wisely or temperately and be wise or temperate but not know his own wisdom or temperance." "But, Socrates," he said, "that is impossible. Therefore, if this is the necessary consequence of any of my previous statements, I will withdraw them rather than admit that a man can be temperate or wise without knowing himself. I am not ashamed to admit that I was mistaken. For self-knowledge would certainly be maintained by me to be the very essence of knowledge. In this, I agree with the one who dedicated the inscription, 'Know thyself,' at Delphi. That word, if I am not mistaken, is placed there as a sort of greeting that the god addresses to those who enter the temple. It's like saying that the ordinary greeting of hail is not right and that the exhortation, be temperate, would be a far better way of greeting one another. The one who dedicated the inscription believed, as I understand it, that the god speaks to those who enter his temple not as men speak. But when a worshipper enters, the first word they hear is, be temperate. This, however, is expressed in a sort of riddle, for know thyself and be temperate are the same, as I maintain and as the letters imply. Yet, they can be easily misunderstood. Later sages who added never too much or give a pledge, and evil is nigh at hand, would appear to have misunderstood them. They imagined that know thyself was a piece of advice that the god gave and not his salutation to the worshippers when they first entered. They dedicated their own inscription under the belief that they too would give equally useful pieces of advice. Shall I tell you, Socrates, why I say all this? My goal is to move on from our previous discussion, which did not yield any clear results, and start a new one where I will attempt to prove, if you deny, that temperance is self-knowledge. "Yes," I said, "Critias, but you approach me as if I claimed to know everything about the questions I ask and as if I could agree with you if I wanted to. The truth is, I inquire with you about the truth of what is being said because I do not know. And after I have inquired, I will determine whether I agree with you or not. Please allow me some time to reflect." "Reflect," he said. "I am reflecting," I replied, "and I realize that if temperance or wisdom implies knowledge of something, it must be a science of something." "Yes," he said, "the science of itself." "Isn't medicine," I said, "the science of health?" "True." "And suppose," I said, "that you were to ask me what is the purpose or effect of medicine, which is the science of health, I would answer that medicine is very useful in producing health, which, as you will admit, is an excellent outcome." "Agreed." "And if you were to ask me what is the result or effect of architecture, which is the science of building, I would say houses, and the same goes for other arts, which all have their different outcomes. Now I want you, Critias, to answer a similar question about temperance or wisdom, which, according to you, is the science of itself. Assuming this view, I ask you, what good work, worthy of being called wise, does temperance or wisdom, which is the science of itself, achieve? Answer me." "That is not the right way to pursue the inquiry, Socrates," he said, "for wisdom is not like the other sciences, just as they are not like each other. But you proceed as if they were alike. Tell me, he said, what result is there of computation or geometry in the same way that a house is the result of building, or a garment of weaving, or any other work of any other art? Can you show me any such result of them? You cannot. That is true, I said, but still, each of these sciences has a subject that is different from the science. I can show you that the art of computation deals with odd and even numbers in their numerical relations to themselves and to each other. Is that true? Yes, he said. And the odd and even numbers are not the same as the art of computation? They are not. The art of weighing, again, deals with lighter and heavier, but the art of weighing is one thing and the heavy and the light are another. Do you agree? Yes. Now, I want to know, what is that which is not wisdom and of which wisdom is the science? You are falling into the old error, Socrates, he said. You ask about how wisdom or temperance differs from the other sciences and then you try to find some similarity between them. But they are not similar, for all the other sciences are about something else and not about themselves. Wisdom alone is a science of other sciences and of itself. And I believe you are well aware of this and that you are only refuting me instead of pursuing the argument, which is what you denied earlier. And what if I am? How can you think that I have any other motive in refuting you but what I would have in examining myself? My motive would be a fear of unconsciously thinking that I knew something when I was actually ignorant. And at this moment I pursue the argument primarily for my own sake and perhaps to some extent for the sake of my other friends. For isn't the discovery of things as they truly are a good that benefits all mankind? Yes, certainly, Socrates, he said. Then, I said, be cheerful, my dear friend, and give your opinion in response to the question I asked, regardless of whether it refutes Critias or Socrates. Focus only on the argument and see what comes of the refutation. I think you are right, he replied, and I will do as you say. Tell me then, I said, what you mean to affirm about wisdom. I mean to say that wisdom is the only science that is the science of itself as well as of the other sciences. But the science of science, I said, will also be the science of the absence of science. Very true, he said. Then the wise or temperate person, and only they, will know themselves and be able to examine what they know or do not know and to see what others know and think they know and truly know and what they do not know and mistakenly think they know. No other person will be able to do this. And this is wisdom and temperance and self-knowledge, for a person to know what they know and what they do not know. Is that what you mean? Yes, he said. Now then, I said, offering the third or final argument to Zeus the Savior, let us begin again and ask, firstly, whether it is possible for a person to know that they know and do not know what they know and do not know, and secondly, whether, if it is perfectly possible, such knowledge is of any use. That is what we need to consider, he said. And here, Critias, I said, I hope that you will find a way out of a difficulty into which I have gotten myself. Shall I tell you the nature of the difficulty? By all means, he replied. Does not what you have been saying, if true, amount to this, that there must be a single science which is wholly a science of itself and of other sciences, and that the same is also the science of the absence of science? Yes. But consider how monstrous this proposition is, my friend. In any parallel case, the impossibility will be clear to you. How is that? And in what cases do you mean? In such cases as this, suppose that there is a kind of vision which is not like ordinary vision, but a vision of itself and of other sorts of vision, and of the defect of them, which in seeing sees no color, but only itself and other sorts of vision. Do you think that there is such a kind of vision? Certainly not. Or is there a kind of hearing which hears no sound at all, but only itself and other sorts of hearing, or the defects of them? There is not. Or take all the senses, can you imagine that there is any sense of itself and of other senses, but which is incapable of perceiving the objects of the senses? I think not. Could there be any desire which is not the desire of any pleasure, but of itself and of all other desires? Certainly not. Or can you imagine a wish which wishes for no good, but only for itself and all other wishes? I should answer no. Or would you say that there is a love which is not the love of beauty, but of itself and of other loves? I should not. Or did you ever know of a fear which fears itself or other fears, but has no object of fear? I never did, he said. Or of an opinion which is an opinion of itself and of other opinions, and which has no opinion on the subjects of opinion in general? Certainly not. But surely we are assuming a science of this kind, which, having no subject matter, is a science of itself and of the other sciences? Yes, that is what is affirmed. But how strange is this, if it be indeed true, we must not however as yet absolutely deny the possibility of such a science, let us rather consider the matter. You are quite right. Well then, this science of which we are speaking is a science of something and is of a nature to be a science of something? Yes. Just as that which is greater is of a nature to be greater than something else. Socrates is intending to show that science differs from the object of science as any other relative differs from the object of relation. But where there is comparison greater, less, heavier, lighter, and the like, a relation to self as well as to other things involves an absolute contradiction, and in other cases, as in the case of the senses, is hardly conceivable. The use of the genitive after the comparative in Greek creates an unavoidable obscurity in the translation. Yes. Which is less if the other is conceived to be greater? To be sure. And if we could find something which is at once greater than itself and greater than other great things, but not greater than those things in comparison of which the others are greater, then that thing would have the property of being greater and also less than itself? That, Socrates, he said, is the inevitable inference. Or if there be a double which is double of itself and of other doubles, these will be halves, for the double is relative to the half? That is true. And that which is greater than itself will also be less, and that which is heavier will also be lighter, and that which is older will also be younger, and the same of other things. That which has a nature relative to self will retain also the nature of its object. I mean to say, for example, that hearing is, as we say, of sound or voice. Is that true? Yes. Then if hearing hears itself, it must hear a voice, for there is no other way of hearing. Certainly. And sight also, my excellent friend, if it sees itself must see a color, for sight cannot see that which has no color. No. Do you remark, Critias, that in several of the examples which have been recited the notion of a relation to self is altogether inadmissible, and in other cases hardly credible inadmissible, for example, in the case of magnitudes, numbers, and the like? Very true. But in the case of hearing and sight, or in the power of self-motion and the power of heat to burn, this relation to self will be regarded as incredible by some, but perhaps not by others. And some great man, my friend, is wanted who will satisfactorily determine for us whether there is nothing which has an inherent property of relation to self, or some things only and not others, and whether in this class of self-related things, if there be such a class, that science which is called wisdom or temperance is included. I altogether distrust my own power of determining these matters. I am not certain whether there is such a science of science at all, and even if there be, I should not acknowledge this to be wisdom or temperance, until I can also see whether such a science would or would not do us any good, for I have an impression that temperance is a benefit and a good. And therefore, O son of Caloescrus, as you maintain that temperance or wisdom is a science of science and also of the absence of science, I will request you to show in the first place, as I was saying before, the possibility, and in the second place, the advantage of such a science, and then perhaps you may satisfy me that you are right in your view of temperance. Critias heard me say this and realized I was in a difficult situation. He seemed to be affected by my difficulty, just as one person catches the yawn from another. However, because he had a reputation to uphold, he was ashamed to admit that he couldn't answer my challenge or settle the issue at hand. He made a feeble attempt to hide his confusion. To keep the argument going, I said to him, well then, Critias, let's assume that there is a science of science. Whether this assumption is right or wrong can be investigated later. If we accept its existence, can you tell me how this science allows us to distinguish what we know or don't know, which, as we were saying, is self-knowledge or wisdom? Yes, Socrates, he replied. And I think that's definitely true. Because someone who possesses this science or knowledge that knows itself will become like the knowledge they have. Just as someone who has swiftness will be swift, and someone who has beauty will be beautiful, and someone who has knowledge will know. In the same way, someone who has knowledge that is self-knowing will know themselves. I don't doubt, I said, that a person will know themselves when they possess something that has self-knowledge. But why is it necessary that, having this, they should know what they know and what they don't know? Because, Socrates, they are the same, he replied. Very likely, I said, but I'm still as clueless as ever. I fail to understand how knowing what you know and don't know is the same as self-knowledge. What do you mean? He asked. This is what I mean, I explained. Let's say we agree that there is a science of science. Can it do more than determine whether something is science or knowledge and something else is not? No, just that, he replied. But is knowledge or lack of knowledge about health the same as knowledge or lack of knowledge about justice? I asked. Certainly not. One is medicine and the other is politics. What we're discussing here is pure and simple knowledge, he said. Very true. And if a person only knows and has knowledge of knowledge and has no further knowledge of health and justice, it's likely that they will only know that they know something and have a certain knowledge, whether it's about themselves or other people, I said. True, he agreed. So how will this knowledge or science teach them to know what they know? I questioned. Let's say they know about health. Not wisdom or temperance, but the art of medicine has taught them. And they've learned about harmony from the art of music and about building from the art of construction. None of this knowledge comes from wisdom or temperance. The same goes for other things, he explained. That's clear, I said. But how will wisdom, considered solely as knowledge of knowledge or science of science, ever teach them that they know about health or building? It's impossible, he admitted. So, someone who is ignorant of these things will only know that they know, but not what they know? I clarified. True, he agreed. Then wisdom or being wise seems to be not the knowledge of the things we do or don't know, but only the knowledge that we know or don't know? I concluded. That's what it seems like, he agreed. So, someone who has this knowledge won't be able to determine whether someone claiming to know something actually knows it or not. They will only know that the person has some kind of knowledge. Wisdom won't reveal what that knowledge is, I said. Exactly, he replied. They won't be able to distinguish between a fake physician and a true physician or between any other genuine and false expert in knowledge. Let's think about it this way. If a wise man or anyone else wants to distinguish a true physician from a false one, how will they proceed? They won't talk to him about medicine, as we said. That's the only thing the physician understands, he responded. True. And on the other hand, the physician knows nothing about science because we assumed that to be the realm of wisdom, I said. True, he agreed. Furthermore, since medicine is a science, we must conclude that the physician doesn't know anything about medicine, I added. Exactly, he said. So, the wise man may indeed know that the physician has some kind of science or knowledge, but when they want to discover its nature, they will ask, what is the subject matter? The various sciences are distinguished not just by the fact that they are sciences, but by the nature of their subjects. Isn't that true? I asked. Absolutely true, he agreed. And medicine is distinguished from other sciences because its subject matter is health and disease? I continued. Yes, he confirmed. And someone who wants to understand the nature of medicine must delve into the study of health and disease, not into what is unrelated? I asked. True, he replied. And when judging the physician as a physician in relation to health and disease, the wise man will consider whether what they say is true and whether what they do is right. I asked. Yes, they will, he agreed. But can anyone acquire this knowledge without having knowledge of medicine? I asked. No, they cannot, he admitted. So, it seems that only the physician can have this knowledge, not the wise man. The wise man would have to be both a physician and a wise man, I concluded. Very true. Therefore, wisdom or temperance, if it's just a science of science and the absence of science or knowledge, will not be able to distinguish a knowledgeable physician from someone who pretends to know or thinks they know, or any other expert in anything. Like any other artist, the wise man will only recognize their fellow artist or wise person and no one else. That is clear, he said. But then what benefit, Critias, is there in wisdom or temperance if this is wisdom? If, as we initially assumed, the wise person could distinguish what they knew and didn't know and recognize the same ability in others, there would be a great advantage in being wise. We would never make mistakes, but would be the infallible guides of ourselves and those under us. We wouldn't attempt things we didn't know, but would find those who did and entrust them with the task. We wouldn't allow those under us to do anything they weren't likely to do well, and they would do well in what they knew. The house or state guided by wisdom and everything else under wisdom's influence would be well ordered. With truth guiding and error eliminated, people would do well and be happy. Wasn't this, Critias, the great advantage of wisdom, to know what is known and unknown to us? Very true, he said. And now you see that such a science doesn't exist anywhere. I see, he said. So, can we assume that wisdom viewed as knowledge of knowledge and ignorance has the advantage that someone who possesses such knowledge will more easily learn anything and understand it better? They can test the knowledge of others based on their own knowledge. Whereas someone without this knowledge would have weaker insight. Aren't these the real advantages of wisdom? And aren't we seeking something more than what she offers? That's very likely, he said. That's very likely, I said. And it's likely that our inquiry has been in vain. I infer this because if this is wisdom, some strange consequences would follow. Let's assume, if you please, the possibility of the science of sciences, and let's admit that wisdom is the knowledge of what we know and don't know. Even with all this, I am doubtful, Critias, whether wisdom like this would be of much benefit. We were wrong, I think, in assuming that such wisdom governing a house or state would be a great benefit. Why is that, he said. Well, I said we were too quick to admit the great benefits that people would obtain from doing what they know and leaving what they don't know to those who know better. Were we not right in making that admission? I don't think so, he said. How very strange, Socrates. By the dog of Egypt, I agree with you. I was thinking the same thing when I said that strange consequences would follow and that we might be on the wrong track. Even if we are ready to admit that this is wisdom, I can't figure out what good it does us. What do you mean, he said. I wish you could make me understand. I admit that what I'm saying might be nonsense, I replied. But if a person has any self-respect, they can't let a thought pass by without giving it some consideration. I like that, he said. So listen to my dream, whether it comes through the horn or the ivory gate, I can't tell. The dream is this: let's suppose that wisdom is as we have defined it and that it has absolute power over us. Then every action will be done according to the arts or sciences, and no one pretending to be something they're not will deceive or elude us. Our health will improve, we will be safe at sea and in battle, and our clothes and tools will be skillfully made because the workers will be good and honest. And if you please, you can also suppose that prophecy, which is knowledge of the future, will be under the control of wisdom. Wisdom will expose deceivers and establish true prophets as the revealers of the future. I agree that with such provisions, people would live and act according to knowledge, as wisdom would prevent ignorance from intruding. But whether acting according to knowledge will lead to acting well and being happy, my dear Critias, is a point we have yet to determine. But I think, he replied, that if you discard knowledge, you will hardly find happiness in anything else. But what is this knowledge you're talking about? Just answer that one small question. Do you mean knowledge of shoemaking? God forbid. Or working with brass? Certainly not. Or with wool, wood, or anything like that? No, I don't. Then, I said, we are abandoning the belief that those who live according to knowledge are happy because these individuals live according to knowledge, and yet you do not allow them to be happy. But I believe that you mean to restrict happiness to specific individuals who live according to knowledge, such as prophets who possess knowledge of the future. Is it him you are referring to or someone else? Yes, I mean him, but there are others as well. Yes, I said, someone who knows the past, present, and future, and is ignorant of nothing. Let's suppose that such a person exists, and if they do, you would agree that they are the most knowledgeable among all living people. Certainly they are. However, I would like to know one more thing. Which type of knowledge makes them the happiest? Or do all types of knowledge equally make them happy? Not all equally, he replied. But which type of knowledge tends to make them the happiest? The knowledge of what past, present, or future thing? Can I assume that it is the knowledge of playing the game of drafts? Nonsense about the game of drafts. Or the knowledge of computation? No. Or the knowledge of health? That is closer to the truth, he said. And the knowledge that is closest of all, I said, is the knowledge of what? The knowledge with which they discern good and evil. Monster. I said, you have been leading me in circles and all this time hiding from me the fact that a life lived according to knowledge is not what causes people to act rightly and be happy, not even if knowledge encompasses all the sciences, but only one science, the science of good and evil. Let me ask you, Critias, if we take away this science, will medicine still provide health and shoemaking still produce shoes and the art of weaving still create clothes? Will the art of piloting still save our lives at sea and the art of war still be effective? Quite so. And yet, my dear Critias, none of these things will be done well or beneficially if the science of the good is absent. True. But that science is not wisdom or temperance, but a science of human advantage, not a science of other sciences or of ignorance, but of good and evil. And if the science is useful, then wisdom or temperance will not be useful. And why, he replied, will wisdom not be useful? Because, no matter how much we assume that wisdom is a science of sciences and has control over other sciences, surely it will have control over this particular science of the good and thus benefit us. And will wisdom provide health? I said, isn't that the job of medicine? Or does wisdom do the work of any of the other arts? Don't they each do their own work? Haven't we already agreed that wisdom is only the knowledge and of ignorance and nothing else? That is obvious. Then wisdom will not produce health. Certainly not. The art of health is different. Yes, it is different. And wisdom does not provide advantage, my good friend, we have just attributed that to another art. Very true. So how can wisdom be advantageous if it provides no advantage? That, Socrates, is certainly inconceivable. You see then, Critias, that I was not far off in fearing that I could have no clear understanding of wisdom. I was right to belittle myself. For that which is acknowledged as the best of all things would never have seemed useless to us if I were capable of any kind of inquiry. But now I have been completely defeated and have failed to discover what it is that the imposer of names gave the name of temperance or wisdom. And yet, we made many more admissions than could be reasonably granted. We admitted that there was a science of science, even though the argument denied it and protested against us. We also admitted that the science knew the works of the other sciences, even though the argument denied it as well, because we wanted to show that the wise person had knowledge of what they knew and did not know. We even ignored and never considered the impossibility of a person knowing in some way that which they do not know at all. We assumed that they knew that which they did not know, which I think is highly irrational. And yet, after finding us so agreeable and easygoing, the inquiry is still unable to discover the truth. It mocks us to a certain degree and has gone out of its way to prove the uselessness of what we only admitted as the true definition of temperance or wisdom through supposition and fiction. As far as I am concerned, this result is not so much to be lamented. But I am very sorry for your sake, Charmides, that you, possessing such beauty and wisdom and temperance of soul, have no benefit or good in life from your wisdom and temperance. And I am even more saddened by the fact that I learned a charm with so much effort and gained so little from it, all for the sake of something that is worthless. I believe that there must be a mistake, and that I must be a poor inquirer, because I truly believe that wisdom or temperance is a great good. And you, Charmides, are fortunate if you truly possess it and can do without the charm. If you can, I would advise you to consider me simply as a fool who is never able to reason anything out, and to be assured that the wiser and more temperate you are, the happier you will be. Charmides said, Socrates, I honestly don't know if I possess wisdom and self-control. How can I know if even you and Critias, as you claim, are unable to understand its nature? Not that I believe you. However, I do believe that I need your guidance, Socrates. I am willing to be influenced by you every day until you decide that I have had enough. Critias interjected, that would be a true demonstration of your self-control, Charmides. If you allow yourself to be influenced by Socrates and never abandon him, then I will have proof of your temperance. Charmides assured them, you can trust that I will follow Socrates and never abandon him. If you, as my guardian, command me, it would be wrong for me not to obey you. I do command you, Critias affirmed. In that case, I will do as you say and begin today, Charmides agreed. I interrupted, asking, what are you two plotting? We are not plotting, Charmides clarified, we have already made our plan. Are you planning to resort to violence without even going through the procedures of justice? I questioned. Yes, I will use force, Charmides replied, since he orders me. So, you better think carefully. But the time for deliberation has passed, I responded, when violence is involved. And when you are determined and in a violent mood, you are unstoppable. Then do not resist me, he demanded. I will not resist you, I replied.
Benjamin Jowett's introduction has been moved to the following epilogue. Translated into English with analyses and introductions by B. Jowett. M.A. Master of Balliol College Regius Professor of Greek in the University of Oxford Doctor in Theology of the University of Leiden to my former pupils in Balliol College and in the University of Oxford, who during 50 years have been the best of friends to me. These volumes are inscribed in grateful recognition of their never-failing attachment. The additions and alterations which have been made, both in the introductions and in the text of this edition, affect at least a third of the work. Having regard to the extent of these alterations, and to the annoyance which is naturally felt by the owner of a book at the possession of it in an inferior form, and still more keenly by the writer himself, who must always desire to be read as he is at his best, I have thought that the possessor of either of the former editions 1870 and 1876 might wish to exchange it for the present one. I have therefore arranged that those who would like to make this exchange, on depositing a perfect and undamaged copy of the first or second edition with any agent of the Clarendon Press, shall be entitled to receive a copy of a new edition at half price. Preface to the first edition. The text which has been mostly followed in this translation of Plato is the latest 8vo edition of Stahlbaum. The principal deviations are noted at the bottom of the page. I have to acknowledge many obligations to old friends and pupils. These are Mr. John Purves, Fellow of Balliol College, with whom I have revised about half of the entire translation, the Reverend Professor Campbell, of St. Andrews, who has helped me in the revision of several parts of the work, especially of the Theaetetus, Sophist, and Politicus, Mr. Robinson Ellis, Fellow of Trinity College, and Mr. Alfred Robinson, Fellow of New College, who read with me the Cratylus and the Gorgias, Mr. Paravicini, student of Christ Church, who assisted me in the symposium, Mr. Raper, Fellow of Queen's College, Mr. Monroe, Fellow of Oriel College, and Mr. Shadwell, student of Christ Church, who gave me similar assistance in the loss. Dr. Greenhill, of Hastings, has also kindly sent me remarks on the physiological part of the Timaeus, which I have inserted as corrections under the head of errata at the end of the introduction. The degree of accuracy which I have been enabled to attain is in great measure due to these gentlemen, and I heartily thank them for the pains and time which they have bestowed on my work. I have further to explain how far I have received help from other laborers in the same field. The books which I have found most useful are Steinhardt and Muller's German translation of Plato with introductions, Zeller's Philosophie der Griechen and Platonische Studien, Sussmill's Generischen Entwicklung der Platonischen Philosophie, Hermann's Geschichte der Platonischen Philosophie, Bonnet's Platonisch Studien, Stahlbaum's notes and introductions, Professor Campbell's editions of the Theaetetus, the Sophist, and the Politicus, Professor Thompson's Phaedrus, T.H. Martin's Études sur la Timée, Mr. Post's edition and translation of the Philebus, the translation of the Republic, by Messrs. Davies and Vaughan, and the translation of the Gorgias, by Mr. Cope. I have also received much assistance from the great work of Mr. Grote, which contains excellent analyses of the dialogues and is rich in original thoughts and observations. I agree with him in rejecting the futile attempt of Schleiermacher and others to arrange the dialogues of Plato into a harmonious whole. Any such arrangement seems to me not only unsupported by evidence, but also an anachronism in the history of philosophy. There is a common spirit in Plato's writings, but not a unity of design in the whole, nor perhaps a perfect unity in any single dialogue. The hypothesis of a general plan that is worked out in the successive dialogues is an afterthought of the critics who have attributed a system to writings belonging to an age when system had not yet taken possession of philosophy. If Mr. Grote should honor me by reading any portion of this work, he will probably note that I have approached Plato from a different perspective than his own. The aim of the introductions in these volumes has been to portray Plato as the originator of idealism, who cannot be judged by the standards of utilitarianism or any other modern philosophical system. He is the creator of ideas, meeting the needs of his own time and providing the tools of thought for future generations. He is not a dreamer, but a great philosophical genius grappling with the limitations of knowledge and understanding in his era. He can be compared to modern writers, but he must be interpreted through his own writings and his place in the history of philosophy. We are not concerned with determining what truth remains for us. His truth may not be our truth, and yet it may still hold extraordinary value and interest for us. I do not agree with Mr. Grote in accepting all the writings commonly attributed to Plato in ancient times, nor do I agree with Scharschmidt and some other German critics who reject nearly half of them. The German critics, to whom I refer, primarily rely on internal evidence. However, I believe they place too much emphasis on the variety of doctrine and style, which is also evident in the dialogues considered genuine by Scharschmidt, such as the Phaedrus or Symposium, when compared to the Laws. If one accepts that works with such different styles and content were composed by the same author, then there should be no difficulty in accepting the Sophist or the Politicus. The argument against the authenticity of Plato's dialogues based on Aristotle's silence is not worth considering. Why would Aristotle have quoted all of Plato's dialogues just because he quoted some of them? It is reasonable to allow for chance and the nature of the subjects discussed in the dialogues. On the other hand, Mr. Grote relies heavily on the Alexandrian canon. However, we cannot give much weight to the authority of the Alexandrian librarians in an age when books were not regularly published and there was every temptation to forge them. It was common for the writings of a school to be attributed to the founder of the school. Even without intentional fraud, there was a tendency to believe rather than investigate. Would Mr. Grote accept as genuine all the writings attributed to Hippocrates, Xenophon, and Aristotle by learned ancients? The Alexandrian canon of Plato's writings loses credibility with the inclusion of the epistles, which not only lack the quality of Plato's work and plagiarize from him in several passages, but also contradict historical facts. It should be noted that I do not agree with Mr. Grote's views on the Sophists, Plato's laws, or his opinion on Plato's doctrine of the rotation of the earth. However, I will not criticize my father Parmenides, who I hope will forgive me for disagreeing with him on these points. I cannot end this preface without expressing my deep respect for his noble and gentle character and the great contributions he has made to Greek literature. In the second and third editions, I received assistance from several friends. I would like to acknowledge the valuable remarks on the Phaedo from the Reverend G. G. Bradley, Master of University College, now Dean of Westminster. Dr. Greenhill revised a portion of the Timaeus, and Mr. R. L. Nettleship provided an excellent criticism of the Parmenides. The Reverend Professor Campbell of St. Andrews and Mr. Paravicini, former student of Christ Church and tutor of Balliol College, read over most of the translation with me. Mr. Evelyn Abbott, fellow and tutor of Balliol College, provided a complete and accurate index. In this third edition, I am greatly indebted to Mr. Matthew Knight, who not only offered valuable suggestions throughout the work, but also expanded the index and translated the Eryxias and Second Alcibiades. I am also grateful to Mr. Frank Fletcher of Balliol College, my secretary. I must also acknowledge Mr. J. W. Mackail, former fellow of Balliol College, who read over the Republic in the second edition and pointed out several inaccuracies. In both editions, the introductions to the dialogues have been expanded, and essays on topics related to the Platonic dialogues have been included in several of them. The analyses have been corrected, and numerous changes have been made to the text. In the third edition, headings and a marginal analysis have been added to each dialogue. At the end of this long task, I believe it is appropriate to mention the difficulties I have encountered. These difficulties have been greater than I expected, and I am not confident that I have overcome them completely. I have learned that a translation, like a painting, depends on very subtle details for its effect. It is a work that requires great effort to be revisited in different moods and viewed from different perspectives. An English translation should be idiomatic and interesting, not only to scholars but also to non-academic readers. The goal should not simply be to replace words from one language with words from another or to maintain the original order and structure. This approach is suitable for a schoolboy who wants to demonstrate their knowledge of a dictionary and grammar, but it is not worthy of a translator who seeks to evoke a similar impression in the reader as the original work. The translator should not simply follow the author, but should strive to understand the work as a whole, including what came before and what follows. The feeling conveyed by the translation is more important than the exact wording. The translator should keep in mind the advice of Dryden, who said to mount up behind the author, rather than trailing behind like a servant. The translator must have a comprehensive understanding of both languages and find a way to express one in terms of the other. The translation should be rhythmic and varied, paying attention to the right combination of words, syllables, and even letters. Above all, it should have a consistent style. There should also be a sense of proportion, with clauses, sentences, and paragraphs in the appropriate balance. Meter and rhyme may be used sparingly, even though they are not inherent to prose writing, as they can help lighten a cumbersome expression. The translation should strive to retain the characteristic qualities of the ancient writer, such as freedom, grace, simplicity, stateliness, weight, and precision. Otherwise, the best part of the author will be lost to the English reader. The translation should be an original work and faithful to the language it is taken from, while being in English. It should be easily understood without reference to the Greek, as English is clearer and more precise. However, Greek writers like Plato can be difficult and diverge greatly from English. The translator may need to convert abstract Greek into concrete English, or vice versa, without forcing one language to be like the other. If the Greek order is confused, the expression weak, the emphasis misplaced, or the sense faulty, the translator should rewrite the passage as the author would have originally written it. They should not hesitate to add anything necessary for clarity and coherence in English that may be omitted in Greek. Translating Plato presents challenges as the interests of Greek and English often conflict. When crafting an English sentence, we may unintentionally deviate from the exact meaning of the Greek. When we return to the Greek, we may constrain and burden the English. We make substitutions, compromises, and adjustments, adding a little here and omitting a little there. The translator may sacrifice some accuracy for the sake of clarity and sense, but they must not omit words and expressions that the English language can provide. They must be patient, self-controlled, and not easily swayed. They should not let the allure of a favorite expression or a melodious rhythm overpower their judgment or focus on an ornament that doesn't fit the overall character of their work. They must constantly compare the copy to the original and vice versa. Translating may not be highly esteemed by scholars, but the translator may find it a source of pride to have spent many years in the company of one of the greatest human intelligences and to have had the privilege of understanding them to some extent. There are fundamental differences between Greek and English that can be managed to some extent, while others remain difficult. First, Greek sentence structure is partly adversative and alternative, and partly inferential. This means that sentence members are either opposed to each other or express cause, effect, condition, or reason. These tendencies can be thought of as the horizontal and perpendicular lines of the language, and the opposition or inference often lies more in the words than in the ideas. Modern languages, however, have lost this adversative and inferential form. They have fewer connecting links, leaving sentences to stand side by side, with their relationship inferred from their position or context. Preserving the effect of Greek is challenging due to the lack of adversative and inferential particles in English and the modern language's sensitivity to tautology. English cannot have two buts or two furs in the same sentence where Greek repeats them. English also lacks particles that express the various gradations of objective and subjective thought found throughout Greek. Additionally, English cannot fully capture the distinction between Greek and the combination of the two, which implies a subtle shade of negation. While English relies more on the apposition of clauses and sentences than Greek, the lack of case endings makes it difficult to use this construction. Consequently, English cannot achieve the same variety in word order or the same precision of emphasis as Greek. Second, sentence and paragraph structure differ greatly between Greek and English. The divisions between sentences and paragraphs are more distinct in modern languages than in ancient ones. Sentences and paragraphs in modern languages are more precise and separate from each other, while Greek sentences and paragraphs often blend together. In English, sentences mark a new step in an argument, narrative, or statement, and paragraphs introduce new views or aspects of a subject. In Plato's works, it is not always clear where a sentence begins and ends, and paragraphs are infrequent. The language is distributed differently and less organized than in English. Classical Greek writers took a long time to achieve the proper use of periods. To maintain the harmony of the English language, the balance of sentences and the introduction of paragraphs at appropriate intervals should not be overlooked. And still, we must be cautious not to give the translation a numerical or mechanical character. However, this is not one of the greatest challenges for the translator. A greater difficulty arises from the restriction of gender usage in English. In English, men and women are masculine and feminine, and animals are also distinguished by sex. However, everything else, whether objects or abstract ideas, is considered neuter. Rarely in poetry do we personify these things, and when we do, we use the feminine gender. Virtues may be depicted as female forms, but they are not described as such in language. A ship is humorously referred to as the sailor's bride, and there are also personifications of church and country as females, although these are more uncertain. In contrast, the Greek language tends to personify objects and ideas, attributing genders according to their strength, weakness, resemblance to male or female forms, or other subtle analogies. Once the gender of an object is established, similar objects or words of similar formation are assigned the same gender. This use of genders not only affects the words to which genders are attributed, but also the words they are connected with, and it becomes part of the style. This poses a difficulty in translating Greek into English that cannot be completely overcome. Should we refer to the soul and its qualities, such as virtue, power, and wisdom, as feminine or neuter? The English language does not allow for the former, but using the latter diminishes the life and beauty of the style. In such cases, the translator may resort to repeating the word or using ambiguous pronouns like they or their to avoid using it and spoiling the sentence. Collective nouns in Greek and English also create a similar but lesser awkwardness. The use of relative pronouns is more extensive in Greek than in English. The variety of genders and cases in Greek makes the connection between relative and antecedent less ambiguous. Additionally, the greater number of demonstrative and relative pronouns, as well as the use of the article, simplifies and naturalizes the correlation of ideas. The Greek language seems to have a better ear or understanding for long and complex sentences, which is rare in modern languages. To bring Greek down to the level of modern languages, we must break up long sentences into shorter ones. Precision in Greek is not as necessary as in Latin or English, and earlier Greek writers like Thucydides and Plato did not find anakalutha and repetition shocking. In translating such cases, the English language requires the translation to be more intelligible than the Greek. The lack of distinctions between demonstrative pronouns is also greatly felt. In English, two genitives dependent on each other have an awkward effect, unless familiarized by idiom. Often, the noun has to replace the pronoun. This and that are found repeating themselves excessively in the rough draft of a translation. While the modern language is more opposed to tautology, there is also a greater difficulty in avoiding it. Although there is no precise rule about the repetition of words, presenting the same thought in the same words twice in the same passage without any new aspect or modification can be seen as impertinent. Substituting one word with the same meaning for another is also resented as tautology. However, even the slightest difference in meaning or change in form, such as from a noun to an adjective or from a participle to a verb, can often remedy the unpleasant effect. Important words should rarely be used twice in two successive sentences or in the same paragraph, unless for emphasis or clarity. Particles and pronouns, being the most frequently used, are also the most troublesome. Strictly speaking, except for a few common ones like and the, they should not occur twice in the same sentence. However, Greek does not have such precise rules, and any literal translation of a Greek author is filled with tautology. Modern languages tend to be more correct and clear than ancient ones. Therefore, while the English translator is limited in expressing relation or connection, they are required to be more precise and clear due to the nature of their language. The use of logic and the progress of science have raised the standard in these aspects. However, modern languages, despite their higher demands, are not as well equipped with expressive powers as the ancient classical ones. These are just a few of the difficulties that must be overcome in the translation work, and the list is far from exhaustive. The excellence of a translation lies not only in faithfully rendering words or crafting individual sentences or paragraphs, but also in capturing the overall tone and style of the work. The best way to achieve a consistent tone is by using familiar and common words. However, it is important to be cautious, as using an uncommon phrase can disrupt the overall style. Avoid using words that make the reader pause or cause difficulty or peculiarity. Each author has their own style, just as individuals have their own unique clothing. It is important not to imitate another author's style. Outdated expressions should be avoided. Occasionally, phrases from Shakespeare can be used, but sparingly. Many expressions used by Shakespeare are no longer in use. The same principle applies to the use of scripture. While it has a greater force and beauty, it can disrupt the flow of the writing. It can be used to recreate the effect of an antique phrase, but should be used sparingly and in a fresh and appropriate context. It is interesting to note that the most effective use of scripture phrases often arises from using them in a way unintended by the original author. Metaphors differ between languages, so the translator may need to substitute or paraphrase them. The translator must also provide expressions for philosophical terms that may have different meanings in modern philosophy. It is important to maintain consistency and not introduce conflicting elements. For example, when translating Plato, it would be anachronistic to insert the feeling and spirit of Jewish or Christian scriptures, or the technical terms of Hegelian or Darwinian philosophy. No two words are exact equivalents, just as no two leaves in a forest are exactly the same. It is a mistake to always translate the same Greek word with the same English word. In the New Testament, for example, righteousness or covenant may be used depending on the context. The translator can use two words, sometimes separated by or, to convey the different meanings within the same passage. Translation should not sacrifice the overall effect and meaning for the sake of precise rendering of words and speech. The Greek dialogue does not have an equivalent in English literature, and the English language is not easily adapted to it. The rapid and abrupt question and answer style, constant repetition, and frequent use of expletives in Greek would not be well received in a translation. Greek has a more passionate and emotional character, making it more suitable for dialogue. English dialogues that imitate Plato fall short of the original, lacking the liveliness, character development, and subtle exchange of ideas. Translating the Platonic dialogue requires the same effort as translating poetry. The language used is of a higher quality, and the prose English language does not lend itself well to the question and answer format, resulting in the loss of conversational ease and potential impairment of the argument's logical precision. In the introductions to the dialogues, essays on modern philosophy, politics, and social life have been added. These essays discuss topics such as utility, communism, Kantian and Hegelian philosophies, psychology, and the origin of language. Ancient and modern philosophy shed light on each other, although they should not be confused. They discuss similar questions in different linguistic and cultural contexts. However, in some cases, only a word has survived while the original meaning from pre-Socratic, Platonic, or Aristotelian philosophy has been lost. There are also questions familiar to modern philosophy that were not addressed in ancient philosophy. The world has evolved and expanded its ideas and methods of reasoning over the past 2,000 years. However, the foundation of modern thought can be traced back to ancient times, and we can argue that we have inherited the spirit of Greek philosophy, despite the differences caused by time and location. This inheritance is not a continuous progression, but rather a new beginning that is partly artificial and partly a result of the questioning of the mind itself, as well as the study of ancient texts. To better understand ancient and modern philosophy, which have significant and fundamental differences, it is advisable to study them separately at first. We should seek to interpret ancient philosophy primarily from within itself, comparing authors with themselves, their contemporaries, and the prevailing thoughts and feelings of their time. Only after this initial study can we explore the connections and influences between ancient and modern philosophy. As we delve deeper into ancient philosophy, we begin to realize that the ancients faced the same thoughts and difficulties as ourselves. They experienced the same challenges that arise during periods of transition and often encountered conflicts between science and religion. While we cannot argue that ancient and modern philosophy are one continuous entity, as some claim about ancient and modern history, as they are separated by 1,000 years, there seems to be a cyclical nature to their development. We are surprised to discover that what is new to us is often old, and that the teachings of the past still hold meaning for us. In the preface to the first edition of this work, I expressed a strong opinion that the so-called epistles of Plato were not authentic. Professor Bain, the editor and friend of Mr. Grote, believes that I should provide the reasons for disagreeing with such a distinguished authority. While a more thorough discussion of this matter will be presented elsewhere, I will briefly defend my opinion with the following arguments. A. The majority of epistles claiming to be from the classical era of Greek literature are actually forgeries. This class of documents is the least likely to be preserved and the most likely to be fabricated. During ancient times, there was a proliferation of such forgeries, and the demand for them was fueled by the existence of great libraries. Additionally, in an era without regular publication of books, these forgeries easily circulated. B. When one epistle in a series is proven to be a forgery, the rest of the series cannot be considered genuine unless there is independent evidence to support their authenticity. Similarly, when all but one epistle are proven to be forgeries and share the same style or motive, they stand or fall together. Even Mr. Grote would not argue that all the epistles of Plato are genuine, and few critics believe that more than one of them is authentic. Furthermore, these epistles clearly share the same motive, whether it be serious or purely literary. Moreover, in Greek antiquity, there is no example of a continuous series of epistles that aligns with a sequence of events spanning many years. Therefore, the external probability against the authenticity of these epistles is immense, and internally, they lack depth, subtlety, and any significant expression. Even if one were to dispute this, it is undeniable that they contain many plagiarized passages, which is a common characteristic of forgeries. They imitate Plato, who never imitates himself or anyone else. Recollections of the Republic and the Laws frequently appear in these epistles. They are too similar to Plato, and yet too dissimilar to be genuine. They are filled with egotism, self-assertion, affectation, qualities that Plato was careful to avoid and unlikely to exhibit. They are also riddled with obscurities, irrelevancies, grammatical errors, redundancies, inconsistencies, awkward constructions, and incorrect word usage. Furthermore, they include historical inaccuracies, such as the claim about Hipporinus and Nicias, the nephews of Dion, who are said to have been inclined towards philosophy and influenced their brother Dionysius at an age when they would have been only 6 or 7 years old. The epistles also contain foolish comparisons, like likening the Athenian Empire to the Empire of Darius, which demonstrate a spirit quite different from Plato's. Additionally, there are factual mistakes, such as confusing the 30 tyrants with certain lower magistrates, resulting in a total count of 51. These blatant errors and absurdities are completely inconsistent with their authenticity. Moreover, as they share a common origin, the more one studies them, the more evidence they provide against themselves. The 7th epistle, considered the most important, shares similarities with the 3rd and 8th epistles and is just as implausible and contradictory as the rest. Therefore, it falls under the same condemnation. In addition, all the accounts of Plato's voyages to Sicily and the court of Dionysius are several centuries later than the events they describe. No existing writer mentions these voyages before Cicero and Cornelius Nepos. It is not inconceivable that the idea of a philosopher meeting a tyrant, initially conceived by a sophist, may have evolved into a popular tale in Greece and the wider world. It could have become one of the enigmatic stories of history, like the Trojan War or the legend of Arthur, which remain shrouded in mystery. During Cicero's time, and even more so in the age of Diogenes Laertius and Apuleius, numerous other legends had formed around Plato's persona, including more voyages and encounters with tyrants and Pythagorean philosophers. But if, as we agree with Karsten in supposing, they are the forgery of some rhetorician or sophist, we cannot agree with him in also supposing that they are of any historical value, especially since there is no early independent testimony to support them or with which they can be compared. For, there is another subject that I must briefly bring attention to, so as not to seem to have overlooked it. Dr. Henry Jackson, of Trinity College, Cambridge, has proposed an entirely new explanation of the Platonic ideas in a series of articles he has contributed to the Journal of Philology. He suggests that Plato conceived the ideas in 2 different forms at different times in his life, an earlier form found mainly in the Republic and the Phaedo, and a later form that appears in the Theaetetus, Philebus, Sophist, Politicus, Parmenides, and Timaeus. In the first stage of his philosophy, Plato believed that ideas existed in all things, particularly in things that have classes or common notions. He thought that these things only existed by participating in the ideas. However, in the later dialogues, Plato no longer included manufactured items and ideas of relation in the ideas. Instead, he restricted them to types of nature and replaced the idea of participation with the idea of imitation. To quote Dr. Jackson, whereas in the period of the Republic and the Phaedo, it was proposed to pass through ontology to the sciences, in the period of the Parmenides and the Philebus, it is proposed to pass through the sciences to ontology. This theory is said to be based on a passage in Aristotle's Metaphysics, which scholars have previously found difficult to reconcile with Plato's own statements. The preparations for this new interpretation are found in the Parmenides and the Theaetetus, and it is expressed in a different form in the Philebus. The principle that gives form and measure to the Philebus is called the later theory, and it is believed to be the principle that converts the infinite or indefinite into ideas. These principles are neither matter nor form, but belong to the intermediate, which partakes of both. With great respect for Dr. Jackson's knowledge and ability, I cannot agree with this newly proposed doctrine of the ideas attributed to Plato. I do not have enough space to fully address this question, but I will briefly state some objections that I believe are fatal to it. First, the foundation of his argument is based on Aristotle's Metaphysics. However, we cannot argue from Aristotle's works, or any other philosophical treatises of his, to Plato's dialogues until we have determined the relationship between these so-called works and the philosopher himself. There is no doubt that Aristotle and his philosophy had a significant influence on Greece and the world. However, it is widely acknowledged that his writings have not come down to us in an authentic form like most of Plato's dialogues. It is unclear how much of Aristotle's works were written by him, and how much was contributed by his successors in the Peripatetic school. This question has never been resolved and probably never will be because it can only be determined through internal evidence. I do not intend to delve into this complex argument. But one small fact, which is relevant to the current discussion, demonstrates the futility of trying to explain Plato based on Aristotle's writings. In the chapter of the Metaphysics quoted by Dr. Jackson, which is about 2 pages long, there are several references to Plato that cannot be found in his extant writings. This insignificant detail sheds light on the nature of the entire book in which these references appear. It strongly suggests that they are not statements made by Aristotle about Plato, but rather reflections of later generations of Aristotelians about later generations of Platonists. Second, there is no indication in Plato's own writings that he was aware of having made any changes to the doctrine of ideas, as Dr. Jackson suggests. Although in the Republic, the Platonic Socrates speaks of a longer and a shorter way, and a way that his disciple Glaucon will be unable to follow, as well as a way of ideas to which he still adheres despite it often eluding him, Philebus, Phaedo. There is no explanation of what Plato meant by the longer way, or the way in which Glaucon was unable to follow, or the relationship between mind and the ideas. It is true that the concept of the idea is prominent in the first half of the dialogues, which, according to the order adopted in this work, ends with the Republic, while the conception of mind and a way of speaking more in line with modern terminology prevail in the latter half. However, there is no reason to believe that Plato's theories, or rather, his various theories, of the ideas underwent any definitive changes during his period of authorship. They are essentially the same in the 12th book of the Laws as in the Meno and Phaedo, and since the laws were written in the last decade of his life, there is no time to which this change of opinions can be attributed. It is true that the theory of ideas takes several different forms, not only an earlier and a later one, in the various dialogues. They are personal and impersonal, ideals and ideas, existing by participation or by imitation, one and many, in different parts of his writings or even in the same passage. They are the universal definitions of Socrates, and at the same time of more than mortal knowledge, Republic. But they always negate the senses, matter, generation, and the particular. They are always the objects of knowledge and not of opinion, and they tend, not towards diversity, but towards unity. Other entities or intelligences are similar to them, but not the same as them, such as mind, measure, limit, eternity, essence, Philebus. To me, these and similar terms seem to express the same truths from a different perspective and belong to the same realm as them. But we are not justified in trying to identify them, just as we are not justified in completely opposing them. Plato always maintains the great oppositions of the sensible and intellectual, the unchangeable and the transient, in whatever form they are expressed. However, the smaller logical distinctions, whether of ontology or predication, which troubled pre-Socratic philosophy and became prominent in Aristotle, are discussed and explained in various ways. In this regard, we can admit inconsistency in Plato, but no further. He lived in an age before logic and system had fully permeated language, and therefore we should not always expect to find systematic arrangement or logical precision in his works. Poema magis putandum. But he is always true to his own context, which should be carefully studied by interpreters and is more valuable than all the commentators and scholars combined. The conclusions reached by Dr. Jackson are to be expected from his method of analysis. He takes words without considering their connection and combines different parts of dialogues in a purely arbitrary manner, even though there is no indication that the author intended the two passages to be combined in such a way, or that when he appears to be exploring different points of view on a philosophical subject, he is secretly developing a system. By using language in this way, any premises can be made to lead to any conclusion. I am not one of those who believe that Plato was a mystic or had hidden meanings, nor do I agree with Dr. Jackson's view that, when he is precise and dogmatic, he generally introduces an element of obscurity into the explanation. Journal of Philology. The great master of language wrote as clearly as he could in an age when people's minds were clouded by controversy and philosophical terms had not yet acquired a fixed meaning. I have just said that Plato should be interpreted in the context of his works, and I do not deny that in some passages, especially in the Republic and Laws, the context is further removed than would be acceptable in a modern writer. However, we are not justified in connecting passages from different parts of his works, or even from the same work, which he himself did not connect. We cannot argue from the Parmenides to the Philebus, or from either to the Sophist, or assume that the Parmenides, Philebus, and Timaeus were written simultaneously, or intended to be studied in the order in which they are named here. Journal of Philology. We have no right to connect statements that are only accidentally similar. It is also not safe for the author of a theory about ancient philosophy to argue based on what will happen if his statements are rejected. Those consequences may never have been considered by the ancient writer himself, and they are likely to be modern consequences that would not have been understood by him. I cannot think, says Dr. Jackson, that Plato would have changed his opinions, but have nowhere explained the nature of the change. But isn't it much more unlikely that he would have changed his opinions and not clearly stated that the most essential principle of his philosophy had been reversed? It is true that a few of the dialogues, such as the Republic and the Timaeus, or the Theaetetus and the Sophist, or the Meno and the Apology, contain references to each other. But these references are superficial and, except in the case of the Republic and Laws, have no philosophical significance. They do not affect the substance of the work. It should also be noted that several of the dialogues, such as the Phaedrus, the Sophist, and the Parmenides, have more than one subject. However, it does not follow that Plato intended one dialogue to follow another, or that he starts a subject anew in one dialogue that he left unfinished in another, or that even within the same dialogue he always intended the two parts to be connected. We cannot argue from a casual statement found in the Parmenides to other statements that occur in the Philebus. Plato's own manner is more accurately described by himself when he says that words are more malleable than wax, Republic, and the argument follows wherever the wind blows. Plato's dialogues are like poems, isolated in separate works, except when the author himself indicates an intentional sequence. It is this method of taking passages out of their context and placing them in a new connection when they seem to confirm a preconceived theory that is the flaw in Dr. Jackson's approach. Jackson's procedure can be compared to the mystical interpretation of Scripture, where isolated words are taken out of context and given any meaning the interpreter desires. It is similar to Schleiermacher's method of arranging Plato's dialogues in chronological order based on the ideas contained in them. However, Jackson goes further by constructing a theory and using it to determine the chronology of Plato's writings. This approach is flawed because it ignores the natural context of words and strips them of their true meaning. According to Jackson's later theory, Plato's ideas are now understood as forms or types of only some natural objects. We can only imperfectly conceive of these forms and constantly strive to have a more perfect understanding of them. Jackson suggests that Plato used a series of hypothetical classifications to approximate nature's distribution of kinds and gain knowledge of the ideas. However, there is no evidence of such a notion in Plato or ancient philosophy. It seems to be a modern interpretation that bridges the gap between physical and metaphysical science, but it lacks meaning. In contrast to Jackson's later theory, Professor Zeller argues that the passages Jackson cites do not support his claims. Zeller states that both the first and second class of dialogues acknowledge ideas of not just natural objects, but also properties, relations, works of art, and negative notions. Additionally, both classes assert that things relate to the ideas through participation and imitation. Zeller's review challenges Jackson's interpretation and supports a more inclusive understanding of Plato's ideas. In conclusion, Plato's writings exhibit unity, growth, and development, but we should not impose a system or technical language onto them. The third edition of this work includes additional essays on various subjects, including language, the decline of Greek literature, the myths of Plato, and the relation of the Republic, statesmen, and laws. Summary of Charmides. The Charmides explores the concept of temperance or moderation, which can also be understood as discretion, wisdom, or modesty. It refers to the harmony or proper balance between the higher and lower elements of human nature, allowing one to be in control of oneself. In this translation, the word is sometimes rendered as temperance and other times as wisdom, depending on the context. In Plato's philosophy, temperance still contains an intellectual element and has not yet been solely relegated to the realm of moral virtue, as in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Socrates asks the beautiful and temperate youth, Charmides, what temperance is. Charmides first suggests that it is quietness, but Socrates argues that quickness can also be noble. Charmides then proposes that temperance is modesty, but Socrates counters with a quote from Homer that suggests modesty is not good for a needy man. Charmides tries once more, offering a definition he heard from Critias. Temperance is doing one's own business. However, Socrates points out that someone who makes another person's shoes can still be temperate without doing their own business. This definition contradicts the division of labor in a well-ordered state. Critias then distinguishes between making and doing and suggests that temperance is doing one's own business, but doing good. However, Socrates argues that knowledge is missing from this definition. Critias eventually agrees with Socrates and proposes that temperance is self-knowledge, aligning with the spirit of Socrates and Greek life in general. But all sciences have a subject. Number is the subject of arithmetic, health of medicine. What is the subject of temperance or wisdom? The answer is that temperance is the knowledge of what a person knows and what they do not know. But this goes against analogy. There is no vision of vision, but only of visible things, no love of loves, but only of beautiful things. So how can there be a knowledge of knowledge? That which is older, heavier, lighter, is older, heavier, and lighter than something else, not than itself, and this seems to be true of all relative notions. The object of relation is outside of them. At any rate, they can only have relation to themselves in the form of that object. Whether there are any such cases of reflex relation or not, and whether that sort of knowledge which we term temperance is of this reflex nature, has yet to be determined by the great metaphysician. But even if knowledge can know itself, how does the knowledge of what we know imply the knowledge of what we do not know? Besides, knowledge is an abstraction only, and will not inform us of any particular subject, such as medicine, building, and the like. It may tell us that we or other people know something, but can never tell us what we know. Admitting that there is a knowledge of what we know and of what we do not know, which would provide a rule and measure of all things, there would still be no good in this. And the knowledge which temperance gives must be of a kind that will benefit us, for temperance is a good. But this universal knowledge does not lead to our happiness and good. The only kind of knowledge that brings happiness is the knowledge of good and evil. Critias replies that the science or knowledge of good and evil, and all the other sciences, are regulated by the higher science or knowledge of knowledge. Socrates replies by again separating the abstract from the concrete, and asks how this knowledge contributes to happiness in the same definite way that medicine contributes to health. After making all these concessions, which are really not acceptable, we are still as far as ever from understanding the nature of temperance, which Charmides has already discovered. He had better rest in the knowledge that the more temperate he is, the happier he will be, and not trouble himself with the speculations of Socrates. In this dialogue, we can note several things. First, the Greek ideal of beauty and goodness, represented by the beautiful Charmides. Second, the true understanding of medicine as a science that encompasses the whole person, both body and mind. Third, the tendency of the time to make verbal distinctions and interpret ancient texts, which is attributed to the ingenuity of Prodicus. Fourth, the germ of an ethical principle that states that temperance is doing one's own business, which in the Republic is defined as justice. Fifth, Socrates' impatience with any definition of temperance that does not include an element of science or knowledge. Sixth, the beginning of metaphysics and logic, as seen in the questions about whether there can be a science of science and whether the knowledge of what you know is the same as the knowledge of what you do not know. Seventh, the rejection of the idea that there can be a science of nothing. Eighth, the conception of a science of good and evil, which foreshadows later moral philosophy. The main dramatic interest of the dialogue lies in the character of Charmides, a young person with whom Socrates speaks in a kind and elder-like manner. His simplicity and innocence contrast with the more sophisticated and rhetorical arguments of Critias, who is portrayed as a worldly man with some philosophical knowledge. It is worth noting that there is no mention of the infamous reputation of Critias in Athenian history. He is simply portrayed as a cultured person with connections to Solon, and someone who followed both Socrates and the Sophists. In the argument, he is not unfair, although he does have a slight tendency towards rhetoric and a desire to save his reputation. Sometimes, he is closer to the truth than Socrates. There is nothing in his language or behavior that is inappropriate for someone entrusted with the care of the beautiful Charmides. His love of reputation is typically Greek in contrast with Socrates' humility. As for Charmides himself, there is no resemblance to the historical Charmides, except perhaps for his modest and reserved nature, which according to Xenophon, once prevented him from speaking in the assembly. It is surprising to hear that he later became one of the 30 tyrants, like Critias. In the dialogue, Charmides is portrayed as a paragon of virtue, and therefore does not require the persuasive techniques that Socrates is unable to employ. With youthful innocence, Charmides keeps his secret and engages in Socrates' method, enjoying the exposure of his elder and guardian, Critias, who is clearly the author of the definition that he is so invested in defending. Charmides is eventually replaced by Critias once the inquiry becomes more abstract, fiat, euthed. Throughout the dialogue, Socrates maintains his customary irony, skirting around several profound truths. However, he either tests them against common sense or demands excessive precision in language usage, ultimately failing to arrive at a conclusion. The definitions of temperance progress systematically from the popular to the philosophical. The first two definitions are simple yet partially true, akin to the initial thoughts of an intelligent youth. The third definition, which represents a genuine contribution to ethical philosophy, is distorted by Socrates' ingenuity and only somewhat redeemed by an equal distortion on the part of Critias. The subsequent definitions aim to introduce the element of knowledge and ultimately unite goodness and truth within a single science. However, the time has not yet come for the realization of this metaphysical philosophical vision. When this science is approached in the Philebus and the Republic, it will not be referred to as temperance, Greek. Surprisingly, Plato, who typically equates goodness with knowledge in his other works, opposes them here. He questions, almost in the spirit of Aristotle, how there can be knowledge of knowledge and whether such knowledge would be useful. The difficulty of the Charmides primarily arises from the two senses of the word temperance, Greek. The dialogue transitions from the ethical notion of temperance, which is variously defined as tranquility, modesty, minding one's own business, or performing good actions, to the intellectual concept of temperance, Greek. This intellectual temperance is described as the science of self-knowledge, or the knowledge of what we know and do not know, or even the knowledge of good and evil. The dialogue reflects a stage in the history of philosophy where knowledge and action were not yet distinguished, leading to confusion between the two and an easy transition from one to the other. The definitions proposed in the dialogue are all rejected, but they shed light on the nature of temperance. Unlike Critias' distinction between Greek, none of these definitions are mere verbal quibbles. It is implied that although this question has not yet been theoretically resolved, Charmides himself has already answered it by practicing the virtue of self-knowledge that philosophers are struggling to define in words. In a similar vein, we might advise a young man troubled by theological difficulties to focus on leading a good life, even though it cannot be denied that correct ideas of truth can greatly contribute to character improvement. The Charmides, Lysis, and Laches are grouped together and placed first in the series of Platonic dialogues for several reasons. They are short and straightforward. The Charmides and Lysis, if not the Laches, share the same quality as the Phaedrus and Symposium, and it is probable, though not certain, that the lesser effort preceded the greater one. 2. They possess an eristic or Socratic character, belonging to the category of search dialogues, Greek, that lack a conclusion. 3. They do not incorporate certain favorite ideas of Plato, such as the doctrine of recollection and the theory of Platonic ideas, nor do they explore questions like whether virtue can be taught or whether there is a unity or multiplicity of virtues. 4. Compared to the dialogues of the middle and later periods, they lack depth and instead exude a youthful beauty and grace. They bear resemblance to one another, with all three dialogues featuring boyhood as a prominent theme. While these reasons carry varying degrees of significance in determining the order of the Platonic writings, they are not definitive. Chronological arrangement of the dialogues is not possible, and the adopted order primarily serves the reader's convenience. However, indications of dates provided by Plato himself or allusions made within the dialogues have been taken into account. Although much can be said on this subject, the results can only be considered probable, as there are no materials that can provide certainty. The relationship between knowledge and virtue is further explored in the companion dialogues of the Lysis and Laches, as well as in the Protagoras and Euthydemus. The contrast between abstract and particular knowledge in this dialogue can be compared to a similar contrast between ideas and phenomena found in the prologues to the Parmenides. However, this distinction seems to belong to a later stage of Plato's philosophy. Modern English translation, 2023. ChatGPT 3.5.